The gavel had not yet fallen when Xavier lurched at me, and the world sheared into noise. His orange sleeves flashed, a blur of wrists and chain. The bailiffs were a second too slow. He rose from the defense table like a coiled spring at last unbound, knocking his chair over, shouting words that dissolved into the hot roar of the courtroom's air conditioning and 100 bodies sucking in breath at once. I didn't move. I watched the cords in his neck jump like harp strings, the way his mouth showed me all the teeth he'd learned to smile with for cameras and boosters and grandmothers in church. It took 4 men to pin him. The judge's voice cut through the clatter, order, order, and then the slamming punctuation of wood on wood. 25 years, the judge had said moments before. And 5 more for contempt if you stand again, Mr. Whitaker. The syllables blew past me like dry leaves. I was looking at my hands, which were calm in my lap, which I told not to shake. I was looking at the polished cherry of the bench railing, the hairline crack shaped like a tributary near the corner. I was listening for the sound of Alicia's breath next to me and the tiny, involuntary inhale she made when she was bracing for something. I didn't look at my parents. I could feel them, though, like a weather front. My mother's perfume, a clean, expensive citrus, had always arrived 3 seconds before she did. I smelled it now and thought of checks signing themselves, of silk scarves and gold bracelets glinting under kitchen lights while a girl cried in our foyer, and my mother said the words that would buy the rest of our lives. "Sit down, Mr. Whitaker," the judge said, "or you will leave this courtroom on your stomach." Xavier laughed, loud, hard, something feral inside the sound, and the laugh carried me backward, not in the legal sense but in the way a smell or a song can drop you through a trapdoor into the past. I fell through the hatch of that laugh and landed 4 months earlier in a dim hallway of our house, the migraine like a white thumb pressing into my right eye, my backpack crooked on one shoulder, because I had not yet learned how to hold anything straight in a world that tilted toward one person's ease. I remember the noise first, not a sound but a texture, a burr in the air. Then the voice. "Stop," she said, small and desperate, and then a choked gag. I remember the shimmer of heat, of a brain blood lit with pain, and how my hand knew the path to my phone without my eyes asking for it. I remember the way the door gave. The inch then, too. The band of light across the hallway carpet like a knife honed to softness by years. And in the blade of it, my brother's shadow. He had one hand around her throat and the other braced against the wall above her shoulder, his forearm flexing with the effort of keeping her up. Her feet scraped the baseboard. Her eyes were open, too wide, and in them I saw the coltish fear of a person learning there's a geometry to a room you can't imagine until you are pinned to it. "Xavier," I said, which was not a plan. It was the sound a person makes when their idea of someone cracks and light leaks through. He turned, fingers still locked at her neck, and the expression he gave me was pure nuisance. I had interrupted a television show, a video game, a nap. "Get out," he said quietly. I didn't. My thumb had already swiped up, camera open. The red dot pulsed like a second heart in my hand. I don't know what I thought I was going to do with it, only that for once I needed reality to have a witness that wasn't going to look away, wasn't going to be my parents in the morning, wasn't going to be a booster's lawyer with a briefcase full of vocabulary like misunderstanding. "Please," she said, and I could see spit on her lower lip, a single string. "Please, Xavier." I said, "Get out," he repeated. I called 911. My voice surprised me. It sounded older than 17, or maybe younger. Maybe I sounded like I did when I was 7 and watched him push a boy off the monkey bars while teachers turned away. The operator asked me to repeat the address. I did. Asked me if the perpetrator still had his hands on the victim. He did. Asked me if there were weapons. There were 2 arms, 10 fingers, a future in the SEC. He let go when he heard the words, "Police are on the way." She slid down the wall, both hands pressed to her neck. He stared at me as if I had done something obscene. Then he walked past like I wasn't there, like the blood in my veins and his had not been mixed in the same house around a table where I had learned to say, "Bless this food," while girls who cried in our foyer got folded into a van with tinted windows and a check they were told not to show anyone. I heard the back door open. I heard the garage door rise, the expensive motor humming like prayer. I got Haley, her name tasted new again, into the kitchen and a glass of water into her hands. In the light I could see the bruise blooming beneath her left ear. She had a smudge of mascara under one eye, a thumbprint of shadow. She kept saying, I'm sorry, like she'd broken one of my mother's vases. The cop at the door had the tired face of a man with high school football posters in his garage. He took the statement and wrote slowly. He did not look at Haley when she spoke. I watched him the way you watch a magician, waiting for the trick, and it came at the end. He closed his notebook and said, too gently, "You sure you want to go through with pressing charges, miss? These things have a way of getting complicated." I said I'd filmed it. He took that in, a flicker in his eyes, and asked me to airdrop the video. When my mother arrived home 30 minutes later, how did she know? She was not surprised to find a police cruiser outside. She was angry like a person is angry at rain on a wedding day. "Officer," she said to the cop by his first name, and then, "We'll handle this." He cleared his throat. "Ma'am, there's a video." She didn't look at me. "Then we'll handle that too." They arrested Xavier that night, and by morning he was home on bail, our lawyer's car smiling in the driveway. My phone lit up with team photos and news alerts and then, briefly, with a text from an unknown number that read, "You think this will stop anything?" By the time I stepped into the kitchen, my belongings were already in trash bags. Not boxes. Not suitcases. Trash bags. My mother was pulling picture frames off the wall and setting them aside, selecting the family portraits where Xavier's smile was widest. "You've destroyed this family," she said in a voice that needed a camera pointed at it. My father looked at me as if he were assessing water damage. "You have 1 hour to get out," he said, and my body obeyed before my brain could protest, because I had been trained my whole life to move when men with voices like his told me to. I tried reason because I was a child that day, even when I wasn't. "It's not the first time," I said, and my mother hissed "gold digger" like it was a rosary. I sat on the curb with the plastic crinkle of my life against my legs. If you had driven by, you would have thought the house had thrown up a person. A Corolla pulled up and stopped crooked, half in the gutter. Alicia got out, hair frizzing in the humidity, eyes pinched small by fear and fury. She did not hug me, there wasn't space in the day for that, but she opened the passenger door and said, "Get in," like she'd been doing this for years. Her apartment smelled like coffee grounds and lemons and something faintly medicinal. There were 3 chairs, a couch that knew more about sleep than rest, a low table with rings like pale motes from cups put down in the same place 1,000 times. She put her keys on the counter and then both hands over her mouth, and then she was crying so hard her shoulders hitched. "I should have known," she kept saying. "I should have protected her. I didn't know where to put my trash bags." I put them in a corner and sat down on one like a boulder. I was 17, homeless in an apartment that wasn't mine, and it felt more like home than any room I'd slept in. Haley called while we were still collecting ourselves. Alicia put her on speaker, and Haley's voice came through small and metallic and brave. "He says he's going to release the videos if I don't drop the charges. He says he knows where you live." I felt cold in my bones. I told Haley I had a video too. The one with his hand at her throat. The silence after was the kind I had always loved, a silence that meant one person had just handed another person a tool they could use to pry up the corner of a lie. Alicia moved fast. She pulled out a laptop that had seen better years and worse rooms. She had folders labeled by dates, and in each folder were the kind of receipts that aren't receipts but are better. Texts, screenshots, names of security guards and desk clerks who had seen things and pretended not to, as all of us did until we didn't. "You think you're the first," she said, and the way she said it made me understand how large a thing could be and still remain invisible if you stood at the wrong angle. My phone buzzed like a trapped insect. Messages spilled across the lock screen. Rat. Career killer. Leave town. One had an address in it. One threatened Mike on Elm Street. One said, "Tell Jessica we know she talked to," and then deleted itself as if words can disappear just because the person who wrote them is ashamed. We heard the knock after a while, 3 heavy pounds that made the thin door flinch. Alicia looked through the peephole and went white, then opened it not wide but enough. Haley stumbled in. The bruises were dark and new. She had her hand over her stomach without seeming to know she did. When we said hospital, she said no. When we said safe, she looked like someone had told her a fairy tale past bedtime. My mother called while we were making plans that didn't have the luxury of being good ones. "You will come home," she said, and the voice she used had flattened juries. "You will tell the police you were mistaken. We will forget this happened. I have it on video, Mom. Then you will forget the video exists. We changed the locks," my father said in the background. "We've deactivated your code. Don't come back for your documents. Consider yourself emancipated." The line died. I stared at my phone until it became a black mirror showing me a boy with a face I recognized and eyes I didn't. Alicia watched me reading the future in it. "They're trying to erase you," she said. She called someone named Rebecca Chen. The name cut through the room like the first good knife in a kitchen drawer that had always had only butter knives. Rebecca's voice was the sound of a person moving chairs around in their head, arranging things so people could live in them. She said words like Title IX, like RICO, like pattern and predicate acts. She told Alicia to document everything. She told me to back up the videos twice. I had videos I hadn't yet told anyone about because I thought they were shame disguised as evidence. In 3 of them, my mother's voice was steady and kind as she handed over a check and instructed a girl to be good and quiet. In 2 of them, my father's hand found the girl's shoulder as if to bless her while he told her this wasn't the kind of thing that had to ruin anyone's life. In 1 of them, you could hear me upstairs breathing, a child pretending to sleep through a storm. A brick came through the window that night. Actual brick, actual glass, an analog message from a digital decade. We didn't touch it until Alicia had filmed it from 3 angles and taken photos of the note wound tight under the rubber band. "Drop charges or drop dead." I knew the handwriting intimately because it had written me notes to excuse me from PE and permission slips for field trips and grocery lists that said milk, eggs, limes, tenderloin. My mother had a handwriting teacher as a child. She had told me the woman used to wrap knuckles with a ruler when the loops weren't tall enough. The loops on the word charges were perfect now as an apology letter to a judge. We did not sleep. The police came to check on a mentally unstable minor, which was rich since my parents had been telling the town I was too unstable to be believed but stable enough to be charged with malicious intent. Alicia filmed them through the broken window, narrated for the camera in a voice that made me want her to do my life in voiceover. When they jiggled the door, I stood where they could see me, hands open like offerings, because I had learned there are days when your body must perform innocence so people don't panic when you breathe. Rebecca arrived early with the prosecutor, Sarah Coleman, whose mouth said in a line that suggested she did her thinking with her molars. They spread files on the table and talked fast the way surgeons do when a body is a system, and the system is failing. They used the word conspiracy, not like a movie but like a blueprint. They drew circles on a legal pad. Family, team, school, boosters, law firm. They drew arrows between the circles. They wrote names. My parents' names. Coach's name. Judges. A man whose face I'd seen at our church lighting candles with devout concentration. The apartment was too loud with typing and breathing and fear. Alicia took us to a diner down the street that had napkins thin as the paper between sheets of gold leaf. The owner looked at me like I'd taken something sweet out of his mouth and replaced it with salt. "We don't serve your kind," he said. When Alicia asked which kind that was, he said, "The kind that ruins a good boy's life." In the alley behind the kitchen, a waitress pressed a sandwich into my hands, the wrapper hot. "Not everyone's blind," she said. "Wait. You'll think better." Marcus knocked at our door that night like a man who believed if he was fast enough, he could outrun his past. He didn't come in. He handed Alicia a drive and said I can't sleep and then left like he had to beat a closing door between himself and the deepest kind of shame. The videos on that drive were the kind you wish didn't exist and thank God exist. Some of them made my stomach turn in a way that made my body remember things I hadn't done. In one of them, my mother's voice was again calm and useful. In another, my father whispered instructions about what to say if asked. The drive turned our case from noise into an orchestra. When Marcus's body was found 2 days later, the town called it a tragedy. I called it a message. Speak, and this is how loudly guilt will answer you. The note in his car was a confession, and the truth of it was heavier than the official lie. We filed the federal charges. The courthouse steps erupted with a crowd that wanted to be a parade and a mob at the same time. A camera found me like a heat-seeking missile. Rebecca stepped between it, and my face like a wall you could move but not climb. Inside, the hall smelled like old carpet and paper, a smell I now recognize as the scent of institutions trying to remember their purpose. People think justice is a single event. Gavel, sentence, a door shutting on a soundproof cell. In my experience, it's 100 paper cuts, 100 small decisions not to look away. It's Miss Martinez, my school counselor, pressing my transcripts into my hand in the parking lot and saying she'd lost her job once for trying to report a player. It's the nurse at the ER documenting every bruise. It's the federal agent who moved my case file from one stack to another that would get read. It's Alicia finding a tracker under her car and not pretending relief when she removed it, because you don't want the illusion that you're safe, you want the record that you weren't. It was the judge who finally revoked Xavier's bail after he threw a punch at me on the courthouse steps. The punch caught on 3 phones and 1 network camera and the marble steps themselves, which kept no secrets. It was the accountant who traced the money from my college fund into payments labeled consulting at the law firm that specialized in making the worst thing that had happened to you sound like something that could be settled with a non-disclosure agreement and a voucher for silence. My money. $18,000 saved over 12 years by grandparents who smelled like Old Spice and lavender, who wrote checks on birthdays with shaky hands, and the optimism of people who believed effort was rewarded in America. Drained. Used to buy girls' quiet consent to the story of my brother's goodness. I had never hated anyone as much as I hated then the version of me who had believed being good was the same thing as telling the truth, and that the truth was the same thing as being loved. The school board meeting felt like a riot in a church. Parents stood and shouted about scholarships like they were sacraments. One mother told me her son's future was in my hands, and I thought, it always is, isn't it? We place boys' futures in girls' hands and then break those hands when they insist on being girls' hands and not a pedestal. The law turned us into diagrams and testimony and exhibits. The first time I raised my right hand, I felt like a fraud until I said my name, and it sounded like a person who had decided to be exactly that. I told the story of the hallway and the door and the way Xavier said, "Get out," and the way my mother said the word family like a currency. I told the story of trash bags and a Corolla and a sister who opened a door to her small life and insisted it was big enough for us. The defense tried to make me say the words jealous and angry. I didn't mind saying I was both. I minded the suggestion those were synonyms for lying. "Didn't you sometimes get into trouble?" the lawyer asked me, and I told him yes, once for sneaking into a pool at night, once for replacing a prayer line in youth group with a joke, once for failing geometry. He did not know where to put that. It bored the room in the best way. Coleman was careful with me on the stand, precise like a person rebuilding an engine and not wanting to strip any threads. She asked questions that gave me the space to say the thing that often gets strangled in polite rooms, that love and truth are sometimes enemies. That loyalty is a word abusers keep in their pocket and hand to you like a candy not to be unwrapped until after the show. That I had loved my brother once the way a boy loves a map of a world he does not yet understand. That the day I called 911 I had finally refused to draw his routes anymore. Some nights were good. Haley had mornings where she did not throw up, afternoons where she did not cry when a car door slammed, evenings where she laughed at something Alicia said and the laugh spilled into me like light under a door. Some nights were not. There are nights when the body keeps score you did not know was being kept. When a smell, cologne like peppermints in a wooden bowl, a stadium hot dog, lemon cleaner, turns a room into a different room, and you find you are crying on a kitchen floor without remembering how you got there. I took my GED in a room that smelled like pencils and old hope. The proctor put a hand on my shoulder when I turned in the last test like she knew my story, and I didn't mind that she did. I passed. Miss Davies cut a rectangle of cake too big and told me to eat it, and I did, and for once sugar was just sugar, and not a consolation prize for a life shaped around other people's appetites. My parents took plea deals. My mother wrote me a letter from jail that used the phrase, "You'll understand when you have children," and I wrote her back that I understood now, which is why when I have them, I will look at them and say out loud the sentence I never heard. I am not a god. I am not the truth. I am a person. And if I love you, I will not teach you that family is a place you check your conscience at the door. Xavier learned prison. He learned it the way he had learned football, quickly with his body first. He wrote a manifesto in a composition notebook that read like a drunk sermon. He blamed iPhones and feminism and atheists, and also God for not protecting him from the consequences of the person he chose to be. And then one morning he was gone. A guard found him on his cell floor, a whole person suddenly a body. The official description said, altercation. In our town they said called, as if his number had come up on a clock they'd always been watching. The news traveled through my bones and left no trace. Grief is complicated. Indifference is not. I became a person who ruins things and rebuilds them. I learned the forms. I learned the code speak in administrator emails and how to translate it to a judge. I learned the way a 12-person jury looks at you when you say he did this to me, and how the room tilts if you speak like you don't need their permission to tell your story. I learned there are networks in this country, fine and strong as spider silk, designed to hold men like my brother in a web of undisturbed success, and that to cut them you must be patient and mean and kind in alternating doses. I learned that kindness to victims can be mean to systems, and that both feel right. Law school was a place where I walked into classrooms with a pass sitting across my shoulders like an old friend who doesn't pay rent but does the dishes. I specialized in Title IX and in the parts of the law that look boring in textbooks and explosive in gymnasiums full of fathers in varsity jackets. I took cases nobody on law review wanted. My first client was a petite forward on a D2 basketball team whose coach had a habit of asking recruits to meet him at a motel off the highway because the office is closed. Her team made the NCAA tournament for the first time in school history 2 years after he was fired. She sent me a photo of her cutting down the net, and I cried in a waiting room with a vending machine that ate your quarters, and for the first time in a long time the thing my tears tasted like was relief. Alicia became a lawyer too. She did it later, with night school and coffee and a job in a clinic that did not always have electricity in the summer. I watched her hands turn into a different animal, less clenched, more articulate. She had a way with witnesses that came from remembering that a witness is first a person. Haley went into advocacy and learned how to speak like nothing could break her voice again, which is almost true. The Supreme Court case came years later, delivered to me by a life that had become an ecosystem of names and stories. They wanted me because I had built a body of work out of dismantling bodies of lies. Standing there, I did not think of the word justice like a slab of marble. I thought of the night Alicia handed me a blanket and said sleep, and I did, and woke to coffee and a plan. I thought of Ms. Martinez, of Marcus, of the waitress pressing a sandwich into my hand like a sacrament. The decision said what it needed to say. Institutions would be held liable for the harm they facilitated. Athletic departments would be subject to the same laws as other parts of the world. The opinion was narrow, but the path was wide, and we walked it. I flew home to the town that had learned to say my name without a sneer. Alicia met me at the airport. She'd gone gray at the temples, and the gray looked like a medal she'd pinned to herself. We drove past the high school, past the stadium where the field lights used to feel like God's eyes. There was a mural of Marcus by the entrance now, his face serious, the date underneath, the words, "If you know, you speak. If you speak, you save." We stopped by the house that used to be mine. It had been foreclosed, repainted as stylish taupe, the yard resodded. The window where the brick had come through replaced with a pane that knew nothing about nights. There was a kid in the driveway practicing free throws against the hoop above the garage. He looked up at the sound of our car and waved like kids wave at adults when they still believe adults might be good. At Alicia's, we ate takeout on couch cushions that had hosted 6 different versions of my life. Haley arrived with her daughter, who had a laugh like a faucet turning on. We did not talk about sentences or precedents or the way people with donors are very brave in other people's lives. We talked about second-grade spelling words and whether cilantro tastes like soap to some people, and I watched the way Haley's hands moved when she tucked her daughter's hair behind an ear, and I knew the world had not been fixed but had at least been reminded of how. Sometimes strangers write me letters. They start with, "You don't know me," and then they tell me their story. Sometimes they ask for help, and I give it, and sometimes they ask for something I can't give, like a time machine or a version of their father who believes them. Sometimes they tell me I ruined a good boy's life. I write back, I did not ruin his life. He did. I did my best to fix everyone else's. People ask if I forgive my parents. I don't know what that means, really. I know I stopped letting my longing for a different past write my present. I know that when my mother tried to hold out her empty hands and say the word family again, I looked at those hands and saw a pen and a checkbook and a brick. I told her that blood is a name we give to coincidence. Family is a verb. Sometimes I drive late at night through college towns, past stadiums with names bought by beer and banks. The fields glow like spacecraft landed in the middle of neighborhoods. The air tastes of hot dogs and nostalgia. I wonder how many boys learned on those yards to turn their bodies into missiles and then never learned how to put them down. I think of my brother as a child, lanky and grinning, running patterns in the backyard while I pretended to be the defender and always slipped at the last second. There is a universe where he put the ball down. There is a universe where a teacher said no and a mother said enough and a coach said you are not your potential, you are your choices. I do not live in that universe. I live in this one where sometimes you have to burn the scaffolding down so nobody else climbs it to a vantage point used to hurt women. Alicia keeps a bat by her door still. It's the same one from that night, the one that made the air look thicker just by being lifted. She's never had to use it. She likes the way it feels in her palm. I asked her about it once and she said, "It's not for hitting. It's for remembering I can." I understood. I married in the backyard of a teacher who lost a job for keeping her soul. We invited 20 people and 2 dogs. I didn't invite anyone who had ever asked me to be small so a boy could be big. Haley stood with us and cried in a way that had nothing to do with pain. Alicia walked me down the path of grass like a person both handing over and keeping. We made our own vows because we'd read too many that sounded like property deeds. I promised to listen even when the listening made me wrong. He promised to tell me the truth, even when the truth made him less admired in rooms that admire a certain kind of man. We served sandwiches wrapped in wax paper. The waitress from the alley catered. She owns a cafe now. Her employees scheduled therapy into their shifts like lunch. On the first anniversary of the Supreme Court ruling, I was in a motel by a highway, eating microwave popcorn and underlining a deposition. The motel smelled like chlorine and cigarettes, and the kind of soap that insists it is fresh when what it means is cheap. I put down the pen. I thought about the boy on the curb with his life in trash bags. If I could touch his shoulder, my hand would shake. I would tell him, "You are about to step into a machine that will try to grind you into a story about disloyalty. Your brother is not a myth. He is a man. Your parents are not a nation. They are 2 fallible people who will choose power over love. There will be days you think you are made of anger. There will be days the anger will be the thing that keeps you moving, and that's all right. You will become a different thing than you planned. You will become useful. Some nights, when the work is done and the house is quiet and the machines in the kitchen hum their little domestic hums, I stand in the dark and think about names. About the way I learned to say mine with my own mouth and not through anybody else's. About the way brother used to be a word that lifted and then became a weight and is now neither, just a fact in a book that got revised. Alicia says healing is not linear. It's a spiral staircase. You pass the same view more than once, but a little higher up each time. I believe her. Sometimes I find myself back at the window with the brick, my heart punching my ribs like it wants out, and then I realize I'm holding a cup of tea and the cat is winding around my ankle, and I breathe, and the moment passes through me and not around me, and that is something like grace. The last time I visited the prison cemetery, it was because a client's case had taken me nearby and I wanted to see something I wasn't sure existed. The markers there are small, numbered, rows like teeth. I stood a while in the winter light and felt nothing at first, then a something that might have been pity if I let it be. Not for him. Pity for the boy he might have been if 100 adults had chosen different at 100 tiny moments. Pity for the world that looks at a fast boy and decides he is a god and then lays girls down on the altars of Friday nights. I left when my breath started clouding and the feeling didn't change into anything else. On the drive back, the sky was the bruised purple of a fruit you don't know whether to throw away or make a pie from. I thought of the word snitch the way it had been used like a knife in my town. It had cut me loose from a place that would have killed me slowly. It had opened a door I would not have walked through alone. Some words you reclaim. Some you don't. That one I put down and walked away from. The word I kept was witness. At home, Alicia texted me a photo of her at her desk. Hair up, glasses sliding down her nose, paperwork fanned like a deck. Underneath, she'd written, "We're still doing it. We're still taking their scaffolding apart." I wrote back a heart, which is the laziest and purest thing I send. People want a neat ending. They want absolution or damnation, a ribbon tied in a bow by a judge or a gunshot. My ending is this: I wake up. I make coffee. I read affidavits. I drive to courts in towns where the diner owners don't want to serve me until their daughters speak, and then they do. I get yelled at by men who love winning. I get hugged by women who have not slept in years and then did, at last. because someone put their story into paper instead of a box. I sit at kitchen tables under ceiling fans and explain in small words the big thing that is about to happen. I stand at podiums and speak into microphones that smell like 100 mouths. I come home and water the basil plant and take the recycling down and kiss the man I promised to tell the truth to. I text Alicia goodnight. I fall asleep. In my dreams there is often a door. In my dreams I open it. If I ever have a child and they are old enough to ask why I did the thing that made me an exile in one home and a citizen in another, I will tell them this. In our town, there was a boy everybody believed in more than the girls who bled because of him. I loved him because people told me to. Then I loved something else more. I loved the idea that the truth could become a place people live. I loved the idea that my name could be a bridge and not a weapon. I loved a future where nobody's scholarship came out of a girl's quiet. I loved the person I could be if I stopped being a witness to my own silence and started being a witness to theirs. I will tell them I thought longer. I will tell them I chose finally to stay. And then I will show them the bat by the door and the mural at the high school and the scar under my eye where my brother's ring caught me once the night before the first game of junior year. And I will show them the law books that open like stern friends and the couch where Alicia and I fell asleep with our mouths open and our hands still touching a file labeled with a girl's name. I will tell them life is the act of making a ledger and deciding what goes in the asset column. Courage, probably. Rest. People who open the door. Names you speak without flinching. And a video taken by a boy with a migraine who became the person holding the camera steady.